Welcome to the Shift Report, the podcast from MCentric and the MCentric Foundation. MCentric is the go-to information and resources hub designed exclusively for the emergency medicine community. We regularly host key leaders from the field who share their insights and experience. Our goal is to inform our listeners and to encourage you to use what you learn to improve your practice and improve yourself. To learn more, please visit us at mcentric.org. Today's episode is sponsored by Lotus Clinician Wellbeing. Lotus Clinician Wellbeing provides consulting services designed to prioritize clinician wellness in order to provide the best care for their patients. Lotus Clinician Wellbeing supports healthcare professionals with personalized coaching and consulting services for groups and individuals in areas such as career development, leadership, burnout prevention, practice management, and more. For more information, visit lotusclinicianwellbeing.com. Today, we welcome Tatiana Havryliuk. Dr. Havryliuk lives and works in the New York City area. She's an accomplished physician and has done some very interesting things, including supporting healthy, safe, and culturally aware mountain travel, which she'll tell us a bit about. But her major focus area now is ultrasound, and more specifically POCUS, and her business built around the growth of POCUS in medicine. We'll discuss that and more today. Welcome, Tatiana.
Hello, Till. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for taking the time to join us here on the MCentric podcast. And you've got a very interesting history and an important business that I think has the potential to change things for a lot of physicians and clinicians, not just in the emergency department, but in other areas too. And we'll certainly talk about that. Tell us a bit about sort of your journey in emergency medicine and what brought you to training in and practicing emergency medicine.
Oh, wow. Great question. Well, first of all, I grew up in a family of doctors, so I kind of felt like that was my way. And what was interesting was I was kept trying to pick something that was a little bit more unconventional. So my dad, he was a internal medicine physician. My sister was OBGYN. I'm like, what can I do that would be outside of that? So that's how kind of EM just kept calling to me because it is something unpredictable, full of procedures. You can take it anywhere. So that's kind of how the passion for emergency medicine started. I also did some EMS rotations during undergrad, and I ended up matching and going to Mount Sinai in New York, which was a great program for me because it had also a really big global health division, and that was also one of my interests. So I really ended up also spending quite a bit of time traveling all over the world and really help develop emergency medicine in those places and also learning from other countries, so how it's done.
Yeah, we in the U.S. have a very localized, very provincial view of emergency medicine and think we know everything and are experts over everything. But you've had practice and experiences around the world. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, there are a couple of memorable experiences. One was when I went to Haiti after the big earthquake, and that was during residency when I was a fourth year resident, I believe. And I was just impressed how sick people were in their emergency departments. It was patients with hemoglobin of 2, like something that you just don't see in the United States, or, ruptured ectopics that were getting choledocentesis with diagnosis. Although, and that's actually part of where my contribution was, where I was like, hey guys, you have ultrasound, why don't we do POCUS to verify where's the pregnancy, is there free fluid? But really, so I was just learning so much also from them of how they were managing certain conditions. There were women with hysteria that I've never seen where they would basically not move at all. And they would be completely like, it looked like they were paralyzed and quiet, but their blood work would be normal. Their neuro exam was otherwise normal. And that was the final diagnosis. So there was just so much, but Haiti was one of the places. I've also learned from my adventures and experiences in Mozambique, where we actually also were teaching an ultrasound course there. And most recently in Nepal. I've spent quite a bit of time in Nepal working at high altitude camps, including at Everest CR as a physician. So lots of learning opportunities for me, how to manage altitude illness, and that's how it also helped me to be an expert in that field.
Thank you. And as we were prepping for this, we discovered a mutual friend who was very much involved in the development of Everest ER, who we'll be talking to in a future podcast. But it's a fascinating subject and a place to practice medicine at the top of the world. And I applaud you for your work there. It's a unique place to practice medicine, but a population that before the ER was developed didn't have much of anything, and now has access to medical care in one of the most remote places in the world. So that must have been a great experience. You mentioned cholestasis, and I would venture a guess that most of our colleagues, they may know what it is from a textbook. They certainly, almost certainly, have never done it, and maybe never seen it, and never seen anybody who maybe never met anybody who's done it. It certainly predated ultrasound as a diagnostic technique. Tell us about your interest in ultrasound, and then we'll delve into what you're doing now.
Well, my interest in ultrasound really started since medical school. I took a rotation. It was an ER rotation. It was specifically POCUS rotation where I was put on with a resident to learn POCUS as a student. And that really changed my life. From that time on, I expected to have POCUS as part of my clinical decision making. So whether it's also guiding a procedure, like putting an IV or looking at someone's lungs to get a quick kind of read of what's going on with them instead of waiting for a chest X-ray to be performed. So there's just so much. And of course, it's also procedure. And anyone who goes into ER, they love procedures. So as a student just starting, you're not, doing thoracotomies. Like they're going to give you an ultrasound probe. So that was exciting for me. So I really ran with it. And although initially my journey was into kind of wilderness medicine space and I did a fellowship in wilderness medicine, I brought POCUS everywhere I went and I encountered POCUS everywhere I went. Um, and it kind of baffled me how all these places I went to, they had ultrasound. And then when I come to the United States, our primary care physicians, a lot of times they don't have access to it in their offices or, like it's just not a, a routine part of their education. Well, it is in other parts of the world. So it's been an interesting journey and kind of putting it all together, um, and taking me on the journey of building Hello Sono as well.
Great. And so let's talk a bit about Hello Sono. I think there are many of our colleagues who develop an interest, and it's a personal interest, and maybe they make very good contributions wherever they're practicing as the chief of something, wherever they're practicing, whether it's chief of ultrasound or whatever else it is. But you're building something bigger than that and building a business that is aiming to broaden the use of ultrasound for good. Tell us a bit about how you developed that and what Hello Sono is and will be.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Well, it really comes, I identified a need. I noticed a need. And that being when I was working in the emergency department, at the time I was the director of ultrasound for a residency program in emergency medicine. I had um, other leaders in other departments come to me asking them like, hey, can you train our staff? Can you QA our images? I'm like, wow, okay, this is needed outside of the emergency department. And of course, it makes sense. And when I looked more into it, I realized that there are really no standards about POCUS in terms of requirements. There are standards, there's just no requirements. So I was trying to figure out how to bring POCUS into primary care, urgent care space, more rural hospitals that don't have big academic kind of development and support in a way that's safe and in the way that's compliant with regulations and where, you can really make a difference in patients' management and outcome and efficiency. So that's when Hello Sono was born. I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. I know there's now also handheld devices that are more affordable, so people are buying them. And then they take sometimes one course and they think they can use it on patients. I'm like, that's not how it works. You really need to have, some feedback on your images, really build up that confidence and proficiency before you can actually start making decisions on your POCUS. And that's where Hello Sono kind of the core of it is helping providers reach proficiency by following the latest guidelines. So either it's from ASAP or AAFP, and that involves that image review process, as well as, and the second component is really the implementation phase. What do you need to have in place to have this run safely, like a whole POCUS program? What is what are your credentialing standards? What are your infection control protocols? What's your workflow? How are you going to document and bill for this? What's your potential reimbursement? Kind of really building that whole program to putting it all together for practices and hospital systems.
Yeah, I've watched this evolve over many years, and they're probably still, I think you're discovering that there are still places that think, well, we can just buy something that will give me ultrasound images, and I've got an ultrasound program. Because it's very easy to buy them now because they're everywhere. And the handheld ones are great. But as with anything that involves patient care and clinical decision making, the safety and the protocols and the security and the QA standards, and then the financial aspect are key. And I think you touched on your experience being abroad and seeing broad use of POCUS, and then coming here or being here and seeing much less use of it. I would argue that there's as much a financial incentive or disincentive as anything because of the way our healthcare system is financed. I imagine are running into that. And I've seen also ROI calculators you have that help people decide whether they should, whether and how they should implement a program. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. And then there are a couple of barriers, kind of big barriers. And I think one of them is really that competency piece of providers just not feeling competent of doing it. But another one is financial. And that's mostly, for the administrators of these hospitals or medical practices. Is it really worth it? Obviously, there's a ton of evidence showing that it's worth it in terms of patient care, in terms of safety of procedures, um, shorter length of stay times, less admission days, et cetera. So it makes sense and it saves costs. But is there also a revenue potential? And there is. POCUS comes with CPT codes. They are for limited ultrasound exams, and you can check them out on my website at hellosono.com. But basically, there are CPT codes, there are billable amounts, there's professional and technical components uh, to the payment, and basically it ranges anywhere from $50 to $120 per exam type, per exam if you're doing it outpatient. If it's inpatient, it's a little bit more complicated. You might be only billing for the professional fee, which is about a quarter of the full global fee. If you're kind of a physician group who is trying to show like, hey, if you use POCUS, this is the potential, ROI on it. But there is, and some other calculations I've made was, using the standards that Medicare sets. If you're doing two POCUS exams a day in one clinic, and you're doing it, say, what did I say? No, I'll say two POCUS exams every day, 5 times a week. Your potential revenue is anywhere from 30 to about 70K, depending $1,000 per year, which is actually enough to pay for the whole training, for the devices, for the storage, and also bring additional revenue for the practice.
That's a great story, and I think that addresses certainly one of the things that has plagued ultrasound programs in their early development of figuring out, well, it's an extra cost because it's more equipment and more training and more QA time and more administrative time. Can we get compensated for this? And it sounds like you've reached a methodology of figuring out, yes, that math works. So let's say, there's a small emergency department or a multi-specialty hospital or something somewhere that doesn't have a program. And what do you offer them, and how do they engage you?
Yeah, I kind of try to figure out where they are at. Do they have a POCUS device at the very least? A lot of times emergency departments do have a POCUS device. It's just not being used and it's not hooked up to anything. And then figuring out, what is the training of their providers? Are they recent grads who actually have a lot of POCUS training and they just maybe need some refresher or competency assessment, or is this a whole program that needs to be put together to really train people in POCUS and then review their images? So one of the services Hello Sono provides is this, not only the workshops, but also the image review. ASAP recommends completing 25 educational scans per each body system for diagnostic ultrasound to gain competency. So if you wanted to learn lung ultrasound, you would submit 25 lung ultrasounds for review with your own interpretation, and we would basically give you feedback and sign off on you performing those 25 exams. So that's really the part with the education. And then obviously there are refresher courses. We do also remote QA if it's a group that wants to do QA together. That's a really great way to learn. And the other component is really how do you make it all work? What's going to be the workflow? How are you going to store the images? What are your archiving options currently? How are we going to make it talk to the EMR, which is a whole other challenge? And it's really probably the most cost intensive and time intensive part is to get this EMR integration. So sometimes I'll actually start smaller systems without doing this EMR integration initially and kind of do it as a stage two. Um, yeah, so and then protocols, and all of that, having all of that in place.
Yeah, I can imagine that the EMR part may well be the hardest. That's actually, regardless of what innovation one discusses in emergency medicine, the integration with the EMR always seems to be the hardest part. Clearly, something that needs to be done, but can be difficult and requires probably specific expertise. You undoubtedly come into places where there's skeptics, either in the group who say, you know what, I neither want nor need to do that, or it increases my risk because it's stuff that I'm not good at and don't do, or maybe in another department who thinks like radiology, who thinks maybe they own it. How do you deal with the various forces at play against you in places?
I see it more as, well, maybe they're not ready yet. Maybe they don't see, the benefit yet of POCUS and they're not ready to take the next step. So usually I educate. I'll provide them literature that reviews malpractice cases related to POCUS. There's very, very few, and most of it is not any malpractice that was associated with POCUS was not because the physician or provider misinterpreted POCUS, but it's because it was not done when it was available or it was
Mhm.
delayed, right? So that's how amazing POCUS is. So I bring that evidence, I share articles. Um, I really don't think there is much more of a risk. It's the same as reading an EKG. If you completed your training and it's within the scope of your training and you're following the internal credentialing that you have for your organization, like there is not a more risk to it. If anything, you're going to make better decisions, have safer procedures. So I think it's really the opposite. But I'm really focusing on finding the leaders in the fields of urgent care, primary care, rural emergency departments and hospitals, and also some of the residency programs that are not in like fully big academic centers that need support. Those are really the targets right now. And I've I have really wonderful clients who are really ready to grow with me and take this technology and uh, do the best for their patients.
This is a great subject matter, POCUS in emergency medicine. As part of this, you're also building a business. And that has challenges for which you weren't trained in medical school unless you did something in medical school that's different from what everybody else did. Learning about how to incorporate and how the legal issues and marketing and all the things one needs to do to build a business. For others who are looking at something to build a business doing, whether it's inventing something or providing a service, what are some lessons you've learned?
Number one is that you cannot do it all at once. Because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do marketing, sales, branding, business plan, finances all at the same time. And that's not how it works. You need to take your time. The second part is really probably maybe even the first part. We'll switch them too, but it's the mindset. It's really internal work. Some of the biggest things that were coming out for me is like, who am I doing this? Who am I starting a business? And I'm like, yeah, I'm a expert in POCUS and implementation and training and the business part I'm learning. And I have a lot of mentors and advisors. I've been parts of multiple programs that help you develop business. And I have a business coach. I have really great legal support. And I really do recommend having a good legal team on your side, at least in the beginning, to make sure you're not making some big legal mistakes, which in healthcare can really lead to a lot
Mhm.
of trouble. So I did learn a lot of things along the way. And yeah, balancing books and things that I actually never did for myself in my personal life. Now I'm doing for a business. It's really it's a challenge, and I think it's a good challenge and opportunity to grow. So I would look at it as maybe a little game you're playing, learning and playing, and don't be hard on yourself if things don't work out or if things don't happen as quickly as you want them to happen. I think there's always something better on the other side.
That's great. On the Shift Report, we host a number of different types of guests, and some in the innovation and business space, such as you. And I there are several that we have hosted and will host who have struggled a bit, who maybe got told no a bunch of times, and I'm sure you've been told no more than once, and faced rejection and faced struggle and didn't understand how to do things and maybe sometimes had to learn the hard way, which you probably also learned the hard way in a few things. But come out on the other end with something that is maybe not exactly what you thought it was going to be when it started, but is growing. So congratulations on that. What's coming in the next couple of years for Hello Sono?
Oh God, great question. I mean, some of the goals are to have a bigger team, to develop some key partnerships that are currently being worked on. And I think just strengthening those would be a really big game changer for Hello Sono and really the people we impact with this. So I think those would be kind of some top two goals. Obviously, there's also a lot of talk about AI and POCUS. So kind of getting more on board on that and with technology in general. And I think that's the beauty of startups and owning your own business is that you get to choose, when you're going to jump on board, what you're going to do with it, and what direction you're going to take. So I'm also keeping some room for flexibility.
Hmm. Yeah, scale always becomes in trying to scale up the business beyond being completely dependent on the person who started it yourself. It's tough for many innovators. And then we'll have another discussion another day about AI. It is all around us, whether we like it or not. And it's certainly within the imaging world, an important part of development and innovation. And certainly, ultrasound has progressed from grainy images that only a few people could actually understand to very high definition, and now AI helping with the decision making. So that's something that we'll be interested in how it comes out for you and how what you learn from it. So thank you for that. What advice do you have? So if you had to give, if somebody came to you and said, I've got something I've invented or a service I want to provide, Besides making sure that they understand they can't do it all at once, what kind of advice do you give?
I mean, I think if that's something that involves intellectual property, I would be really careful where you're working on it. Make sure you're not working on it like during your work hours or inside the institution you're employed by, because they could actually claim the rights for that intellectual property, to that intellectual property. And I actually know someone who went through something like this. So definitely make sure you're separating that work from your regular, ED shift work, and maybe even have two different laptops just to make it very clear. Um, that would be one of the things I would advise. And the second one is really maybe commit to one kind of business launch type of courses and just do it. Complete all steps because it is good. There is like where you build the foundation and then you add on when you build the business. And I think that would be helpful. I think one thing I would advise people not to do is to not consume too much information about building businesses and too much of anything, because then you end up kind of wanting to do and implement all of it. And if it's just you as one person, it would be really hard to do.
That's great advice, I think, and that's the sort of thing we hear from a lot of people because business, there's a skill set in business and there's a knowledge base, but at a certain level, there are people who know how to do that well, and finding those people to help you with that can be key. And I think you've learned that from legal, accounting, and otherwise, finding people who have the deep knowledge in building and growing a business so that you can use your expertise to build what you're building.
I wanted to add one more thing. I think it's really important to surround yourself with people who are supportive, like that they who believe in you and your project and potential business. Be around those people. There are going to be people who are going to be telling you like, "Oh, this is crazy. Oh, great idea, but don't do it." Just like trust your gut and do what um really feels right for you. And I think people we surround ourselves with is really important.
That's great advice. And it's interesting when you step back from that advice, it sounds almost intuitively obvious. Well, of course, you surround yourself with the right people. But, clearly people we both probably know people who have had people who weren't supportive, who told them they couldn't accomplish what they wanted to accomplish and didn't help them reach their goals. You've learned find people who support you and believe in you, and I think that's important advice for others who are building something. And we have others examples of others who have built from their inventions and their ideas and maybe took longer than they thought they were going to take, but are now succeeding. So thank you for that. Um, so thank you very much. This has been a wonderful conversation, and we'll certainly have you back. There are lots of other things in your past history and resume and that are fascinating topics to talk about. And we'd love to hear more about how Hello Sono grows. So thank you very much, Tatiana, for joining us here today.
Thank you, Till. I'd be happy to be back.
And thank you for joining us in this installment of our M-Centric podcast, The Shift Report. And special thanks to Dr. Tatiana Havryliuk for sharing her important insights. For more content, networking, and innovation in the world of emergency medicine, please visit mcentric.org.